Welcome, everyone. My name is Lori Lynn Turner. I'm the Associate Director of the New School Graduate Writing Program. Tonight's event, The Year of James Baldwin, Another Country, Seeing Place from a Distance, is a part of the year-long citywide celebration, The Year of James Baldwin, which is presented in partnership with Canem Foundation, Harlem Stage, Columbia University School of the Arts, and New York Live Arts, and in collaboration with the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, the School of Media Studies, and the MFA Creative Writing Program. One more thing, we have one more event coming up here at the New School for the Year of James Baldwin. It's a sound installation, Mandy and Keith Obadike, blues speaker for James Baldwin, Wednesday, April 1st through Thursday, April 30th at the New School University Center. I'd like to give a special shout out this evening to our friends at Cave Canem for helping put together this fine program. Yes, give them a hand. Now I'd like to invite Tracy Ann up to the podium to introduce the panelist. Tracy Ann.
Being introduced makes one sound more wonderful than they are. So thank you, Lori Lynn. I appreciate it. I was involved in to determine the New School's contribution to the Year of Baldwin. It's so wonderful to see something like this come together. It's such a pleasure to be able to participate in this evening's program. Another Country, Seeing Place from a Distance. And I'm delighted to be thinking about James Baldwin's work with Dante Micheaux and Darryl Pinckney. Let me take a very brief opportunity to introduce them. Dante Micheaux is the author of Amorous Shepherd. His poems and translations have appeared in the American Poetry Review, Bloom, Callaloo, Gathering Ground, and Rattapallax, and that alone should garner him awards just for the name, among other journals and anthologies. He has been a guest of the Poetry Project and the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine. His honors include a prize in poetry from the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, which is based here at the New School, the Oscar Wilde Award, and fellowships from Canem Foundation and the New York Times Foundation. He resides in London and New York City. Darryl Pinckney, a longtime contributor to the New York Review of Books, is the author of a novel, High Cotton, and in the Elaine Locke lecture series Out There, Mavericks of Black Literature. His new book is Blackballed, The Black Vote and U.S. Democracy. Please join me in welcoming them, and I'm going to ask them to come up. While this is set up with us on a dais, looking out amongst the people, allegedly to deliver like nuggets of knowledge and wisdom, I really want to set this up as a conversation instead. And I told the guys, and I'm calling them the guys, they might not like that, but I'm gonna call them the fellows or the guys. Okay, thank you. I told them that I wanted it to be like we were in one of our living rooms talking about Baldwin. And I do think that that actually does happen. Like people are having regular conversation and something drifts onto James Baldwin, and on the other hand, we have conversations and don't know that we're being influenced by James Baldwin. So that's where this is at. I'm sure that there are people out in the audience that have much to say, so we're not going to go on and on and on and drone on, but I would like to sort of frame our conversation and talk about some critical issues, and we'll see how it goes. So the first thing that I wanted to pose to the two of you was, how did you come to know James Baldwin's work?
I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. He was very much in the home, on the shelves, and so it was something I stayed away from because it belonged to my parents. And my grandfather particularly hated James Baldwin. I didn't know why. He was very famous. I knew his face was on the cover of magazines and that he was on TV and that there was something deeply controversial about him. And then I read Giovanni's Room before I knew what gay was. I read it on a cross-country trip with my family, just completely absorbed, and they kept looking at me because they knew why I was reading it, but I didn't. But still, I sort of resisted him because I knew there was this fiction by James Baldwin, and then there was this troublemaker called James Baldwin. And I had a high school teacher who finally gave me a copy of the New York Review of Books with his open letter to Angela Davis in it. And it sort of began to change my life because of the two of them. Never mind that your family had been trying to tell you this, but somehow in a different way, it was then okay to be bookish, wear glasses, and be black. You know, that you weren't a traitor to blackness, which where I grew up in the circumstances I grew up was a very big deal for me. And then coming to New York to school, he was very much in the air, very much alive. He always mattered to me thinking about writing because the professors I had valued him so much. Even though at the time, because he didn't have a BA, he was denied teaching posts for many years. And sometimes you could see him around on the streets. Back then, before tourists, no one ever bothered anybody. You didn't bother Mrs. Onassis on the street, you didn't bother Allen Ginsberg, and you could see him sort of around. And every time my heart would pound because, you know, he meant so much. And his funeral was the first funeral I ever went to.
It's wonderful.
For me, it's a long answer because Baldwin died when I was 7, and I think the first time I came across him was when I was 12. Some white do-gooders decided to take a bunch of inner city kids from Trenton, where I'm from, to a summer camp in Princeton, and so they also decided while we were at this summer camp that we should read Soul on Ice at 12, which I don't think is a good idea. But anyway, so I read Soul on Ice, and I was 12, and I saw this invective against James Baldwin, against Martin Luther King, as he was commonly referred to by black nationalists at the time, and that sent me looking for him. And so I read the essay Notes of a Native Son, then just the essay, and I guess I put him away for a while. It was too much for me, I think, at that age. But then in high school, I had great English teachers, one in particular who was very influenced, as lots of English teachers were, by Robin Williams' performance in Dead Poets Society, and he wanted to teach us everything that he could, and he wanted to be really diverse, and he had graduated from Princeton, and they were, it was the 90s, and everybody was getting consciousness and interdisciplinary. And so Going to Meet the Man was on my high school syllabus, and I read that, loved that. And everyone was making a big fuss about Sonny's Blues, and my favorite story in that collection is This Morning, This Evening, So Soon, where the characters are loosely based on some of his siblings. And sorry, do I have to speak this closely to the microphone in order to sorry. So I was talking about a short story in Going to Meet the Man, and the collection was really, it was dark in a way that was interesting, but it was also, being one of only a handful of black students at this mostly white school, the first thing that we had ever read by a person of color. And so once I read that, then I thought, I need to read more of him. Then I read the entire collection, Notes of a Native Son. And then I literally thought I was James Baldwin reincarnated. And I was like, I have to, be this man. My mother's in the audience. She can attest. So when I graduated from school, that was the height of my Baldwin emulation. And I took some savings. I went to Paris for a few weeks, all on my own. I had never, I had a little tryst with some French boy of Italian descent who was, very unlike Giovanni. I can say that. And so that happened. And then we, I had to come back. I had to start school and all of that stuff. I went back home. I started to read the novels. I was very obsessed with the novels. and this was probably around age 19, and then I left the country again to start my university studies in Chile. And there I really had to confront what being an American was, particularly how being a citizen of the empire influenced the Chilean people, in particular, how American intervention had influenced that thing. And so Baldwin was really helpful with all of that. And then I came to Eugene Lane College, and in my day, I also see a classmate in the audience. In our day, there were three major gods at Lang: Jacques Derrida, Judith Butler, and James Baldwin. And Baldwin was in every course. I was a, for lack of a better word, a triple major. Lang College is a bit crazy. And so in all the classes I had, whether it was religious studies, psychology, philosophy, feminism, creative writing, Baldwin was represented on the syllabus. And I can't seem to escape him. I more recently
Embodied him at one
Well,
point.
I tried.
That's fun. The only thing I would add, to just add my own little piece to it, is I found Baldwin in college. He was assigned for a class at NYU. And as is sometimes the case in courses, things are assigned and then they're not discussed. So it was on the syllabus, and we didn't cover it, but I had the book, and the book came with me to various dorms, then various apartments, and so on, and I rediscovered Baldwin when I started taking some graduate classes as a 23-year-old, and I decided to assign a story by way of making myself read it, because I had so much other work of my own to do. And it's funny about going to meet the man, because it's one of the things that I like to teach the most. It ruins people, and it's wonderful. And that's much of what James Baldwin does, is sort of like shake you up and put you back together again in a different kind of way. And I thank you both for what you contributed to just even that just brief question alone. And in some ways, you kind of pick up where my next question was going to go, was to find out how he influenced your work. I mean, Dante, he was you were he. I mean, so I kind of know. But I mean, I'm sure it was more than that.
I mean, I tried to let Baldwin influence my work as much as possible, but I'm a poet, and I don't know, I might get in trouble for saying this in the year of Baldwin, but I think Baldwin would agree. In fact, Baldwin did agree. He was not as good a poet as he was a prose writer. And his only collection of poetry, Jimmy's Blues, he had been writing loose poems for a while, and then all of a sudden his brother David told him, you should collect these things and publish a book. Well, by that time he was James Baldwin, so he could spit on a piece of paper and somebody would have published it in hardback. But he, so that was difficult. When I was at Lang, we had this creative writing class, and we were using Baldwin to sort of write these personal essays, and I thought Baldwin influenced my essay, and I said as much in my class. And there was a very famous, at the time, professor at Lang College named Gary Lemons. He was the most popular professor at the time, and he literally laughed out loud, and he said, "Oh, it's Dante comparing himself to James Baldwin," which in hindsight, he was right. I was not as good a prose writer as James Baldwin, but I would say he influenced my life, my way of being in the world, my way of looking at the systems we use to navigate our existence, more so than he influenced directly any sort of stylistic choices in my poetry.
Okay.
I'd say that.
Thank you.
I had a writing class. I used to sneak across the street to Barnard to sort of read Doris Lessing with the girls, because the English department at Columbia was so. And I had this writing class with Elizabeth Hardwick that changed my life. And she said, "Oh, you came to New York to be what you are, mad black queen." And she was always interested in what one read, because you learn to write by reading, not by writing. And one Sunday she said, "You have to come down, I want to talk to you." And I came down and she said, "You know, I have to tell you, you're the worst poet I've ever read. Don't write any more poetry. But read poetry before you write prose. That'll help you." My obsessions at the time were Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath, suicides. But I was a student at the time that there was a real drama going on in Baldwin's life and his work, and this was that everyone was saying he was in decline. He was in decline. The essays weren't as good. The late novels weren't as good. And it was a sort of struggle to find him in a way, because literature was still, I don't know what to call it, a very separate world for me from black life, black struggle, politics, American culture. And then suddenly there was literature, which was just a different private space, had Frank O'Hara in it and Europeans in translation and places, books that took you on a journey or made you free. And I think that Baldwin was always in my mind because at the time there was a great deal of pressure that sort of said, oh, blacks can write autobiography, but they can't write fiction. Because at the same time that Baldwin's reputation was supposedly in decline, people were saying, well, you know, Native Son is not really very good because this commie speech at the end in the courtroom is a major flaw. You don't hear that anymore now that, you know, the communist states are dead. But at the time, it was a very strong thing. And it hadn't yet come to the moment where Ellison was sort of elevated over everyone else because the politics, the overt politics were gone, had been edited out. That was to come. In the same way that when Baldwin started out, and the new critics wanted the text and not the politics. And this distinguished Baldwin from the previous generation. He didn't have Marxism, he had Freud. And very soon the same thing would happen. Deconstruction would displace politics. And, you know, anyone sort of with politics was out. And in an odd way, though, deconstruction kind of brought Baldwin back because all the things he was writing about were things these people were interested in. But he always stood in my mind as the example of how to make a life as a writer, that it was okay to be lost, that it was okay to make mistakes, that you had to make your own mistakes, that you couldn't let anyone else tell you how to do it, that you had to stick up for what you believed in, no matter the price, and that writing had no reward outside of itself. His successes were accidental almost. He ruined his fictional life trying to reproduce the success of another country because he had so many financial dependents. But I also valued Baldwin because he was not academic. And that mattered a great deal at the time, that writing was in the real world and not in the classroom. That was a long answer. I hope some of it made sense.
It made sense. Made total sense. You know, what I'm struck by in both of your responses is the immediacy of Baldwin for you both. And Baldwin, of course, has an immediacy for many of us. But as a teacher, I have to say that I am continually struck by how few students today know James Baldwin, who he is, first of all, or his work at all. I had a student say to me last week in class, I'm so glad James Baldwin is going to be here next week.
If only.
And, well, you saw me just sigh right there because it's, you know, where do I go with that? You know, I'm walking out the classroom, you know, it's already 8:15, I want to get home, and it's like, how do I address that? How do I say, well, he's not going to be here, I wish he would be, I mean, on and on. Anyway, what I really want to say is just, I'm struck, like how few students know. And in my particular school, here at the new school, I teach adult degree students mainly. So they're students who are the average age of 28. So I'm saying that so that you don't think that I'm speaking specifically about people who are coming directly out of high school, although there are some students who are 18 to 22 in my classes. So the fact that Eugene Lang College had James Baldwin as a cornerstone of its curriculum at a certain point, and that Baldwin is absent from conversation, syllabi, or even just the sort of cultural consciousness of students today is both fascinating to me and, of course, troubling. And there's a question in here somewhere. I guess I'm wanting to know, what do you feel about that? Is it because we are post-racial? Is it because we have a black president? Like, where does Baldwin, is it because I've heard many times that Baldwin's work wasn't good toward the end, to your point, so people only will remember the later things, and so why read him at all? Just wondering, what do you think of that? Like, what might it be that he's not so present, let's say, in classrooms? And that doesn't mean that you have had to be in a classroom recently. Just wondering what you think of it. I mean, I could go on, but they don't want to hear me.
Oh, nonsense, my dear.
Well, I think the problem has several facets. One is the limits on literature that gets sort of produced in educational systems. And so Baldwin faded when Morrison began to rise. So by the time Morrison was winning the National Book Award for Song of Solomon, something like that, that was coincided with the publication of Just Above My Head or something like that. Or maybe it was a couple of years before that. But you can only have one black writer, and so I think that has something to do with it. And I actually saw the shift in my own studies when we sort of put Baldwin away, and then we moved on to other writers. But the other thing I think is exactly what you said. Some people really feel that he was in decline, and I think I don't agree with that. I think I think his style changed in a very nuanced way. The novels became much more sort of parabolic towards the end. I think Baldwin's scholarship also is experiencing a renaissance now, and so in the next 5 years, I think the conversation around him will reach another peak. I know that I'm very interested in a book that someone's working on. Dagmawi Wubshet at Cornell is working on a book on Baldwin's late style. Wow. And so I think that will give students another way to access those novels and maybe start to put Go Tell It on the Mountain and Giovanni's Room in Another Country. Another Country I think is still the best novel, but put those to bed and start to concentrate a little more on the late work. I don't know.
Well, maybe we're coming to the generational difference, which I don't like because I'm on the wrong side of it. But there's something so riveting, unexpected, and unprepared for in Baldwin's early essays. There'd never been a voice like that, not since Du Bois, really. Something so elevated yet radical. It's something he, in a way, didn't approach in his fiction because, well, the form asked for something else, and also the material. What he didn't want to write about directly in the essays, he wrote about in the novels. It's his life over and over again. Well, it's everyone's life in fiction, that kind of thing. But I remember that people who had been very critical of him as this darling of white liberalism then began to defend him when he started to get sort of bad reviews. Black people always forgive the person who's in trouble, even Michael Jackson, that kind of thing. And there sort of started this thing about the black novel as opposed to, I don't know, the white novel, I guess. Even Toni Morrison was kind of into this, this kind of oral sort of thing. And I could never sort of follow all of that. All fiction obeys certain rules, even if there are many different kinds of fiction. And when I said earlier that I thought Another Country ruined his fictional life, Another Country is an amazing book because there's nothing else like it. One of the reasons he means so much to Dante Micheaux and me is that he was a very isolated figure. He'd already written Giovanni's Room. There was no scandal to sort of say about him. And I can remember looking at photos of him and Marlon Brando and thinking, well, he figured that out. So, he sort of then was saved by being black at the end. But I also think that considering what he wrote about the family, the novels toward the end then become rather sentimental about the family. And it's as though he's apologizing for having said harsh things earlier on. But it's also that he's acknowledging that sort of black critics, black writers, black people embraced him at the end when sort of whites were more or less letting him go. And he was trying to make his peace, I think. But Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone and Just Above My Head are these huge novels in the first person, full of talking, but not to the same purpose that they do in Another Country. But he is trying to kind of get that going again. And there's a moment in Just Above My Head when the character walks across the room to the refrigerator, gets a tray of ice, comes back across the room and puts the ice in his glass. And this is Baldwin doing that, typing it in, trying to kind of get himself sort of going. And it's very moving, his last work, because, the struggle to compose is very clear. He took Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone to his editor at Random House, E.L. Doctorow, and said, do with it whatever you want. I think he was so burned and broken by the violence that changed or stopped a lot of the civil rights movement. I think it really sort of got to him, and had he lived longer, who knows sort of what would have happened if he'd been around to see some of the appreciation for what he'd sort of done. But there's no question that the second half of his life was, a crisis, and that the work was weaker. The essay style did change, but it's not a late style. It's a sort of giving up of something, that it gave people who were opposed to, radicalism, reasons to oppose radicalism, but not for literary reasons. I don't know. I'm kind of casting about here, but I think that it's a danger to romanticize Baldwin, since he himself was so against it. Mm-hmm. He didn't like the Beats for that reason. He didn't like middle-class students in Europe for that reason. He was always very clear, even if he's speaking in very arresting language. It was always very clear what was at stake. And so it's sort of scholarship is pushing this engine that, since we've gone over and over the early work, we'll now move on to the late work. But in order to study it, we have to kind of raise it up, a bit like very innocent guys who think in order to sleep with that girl, I have to tell her that I have to tell myself that I'm in love with her, that kind of thing. But I think Baldwin's life should always be seen with its whole arc and not sort of broken up. So I've gone on, sorry.
I think you said something very interesting with that analogy about the person who has to convince the person that I'm in love with the woman in order to sleep with her. I think romanticizing Baldwin is dangerous, and we also need to look at the sort of real physicality of his life. Not that the late work has problems for this sort of reason that he didn't know what he wanted to do or didn't know where he wanted to go. I mean, he was so stretched by the time he was, late 40s, early 50s, and his drive was about to do all of these sort of cinematic projects or producing a play.
He'd gone to Hollywood.
Right, yeah. And it was a terrible experience for him. And I mean, like,
Welcome to Hollywood.
but you know, this is the thing. He wasn't his literary imagination was not burnt out. He felt that he had something to say. He knew that he wanted to say something, but physically he was pulled. You know, he was pulled in this other direction, trying to create in these various genres. And I don't think his weakness got any weaker because the writing got weaker. I guess that's what I'm trying to
Yeah, well, he's always interesting because it's Baldwin. You know, he can always turn a phrase or something, but there is some falling off of concentration or investment in these late works. Maybe because he was, in a way, sort of all over the place or divided in his heart. I'm not sure. I mean,
I think that it's just that his focus had shifted. I think the later work is valuable because so rarely are we able to see the arc of someone's work. What I mean to say is we have a lot of writers and there's a particular work or a particular period that we focus on, which you've mentioned already. People tend to focus on certain aspects of Baldwin's work, but he wrote so much and he wrote in various genres so that we're able to actually see the arc. What I'm hoping is that we can actually have more conversation about. That's really what the question was about. There's something in Baldwin for everybody, in a way, but the fact that folks have yet to discover him is both exciting but also terrifying to me too, because there's so much going on in the world right now that would lend itself to Baldwin. Late novels, early essays, bad poetry, whatever, you know. But I agree with both of you, actually.
well, his gift was for the lyrical voice. I mean, in
Turn of
Giovanni's
phrase.
room is this kind of 50s poeboyer. And to bring up the subject of gay, you have to sort of kill them off, like The City on the Pillar by Gore Vidal. It's sort of the convention of the time. It's very mean to women, this book. It's very hard on effeminate men, and it's certainly hard on older men. To read Giovanni's room again at my age is slightly depressing. But at the same time, there are passages of such loveliness in there when he just talks about his feelings for Giovanni, his love, and it's this Lucien Happesberger, obviously. Not obviously, but it is. This was his gift. But to be a big novelist, you had to write big novels. You know, this was the burden of the time. His peers are William Styron and Norman Mailer, not Alice Walker and Toni Morrison. You know, so Richard Wright's voice went out of fashion. It went out of date in his fiction, this kind of hammy 1930s kind of tabloid voice. It went out of fashion because it was so uncool by the time of the late 50s and the 60s. He sounded very hectic in his prose. Baldwin's voice never dated because he always wrote as a young person. His voice never aged. But something about his technique as a realist didn't sustain interest after a while because it's this one person going on, creating all the scenes. Everything, therefore, is in flashback within flashback. And it made for rather cumbersome fiction. And his problem always was that his message couldn't fit the available forms, except with the freedom of the essay. He's not the only writer to have this problem. Susan Sontag could not write dialogue. But the reason The Volcano Lover works as a novel is that, you know, she sort of wrote it as an essay, really. You know, it's sort of to free the form. So he was a prisoner of the form in ways that surprised me, you know, given how bold and courageous he was in every other way.
I think that's one of the surprises for me when it comes to his poetry, because his strength was in lyricism, but he had no ability to transfer that into poetry, and I think it's.
Why do you think that might be?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my own idea around that is that the drive often. I mean, I'm sure almost every person in this room has tried and probably succeeded, but might be embarrassed by the fact that they've written a poem or two, and that usually comes out of, your sort of adolescent angst. You see someone that you have fallen madly in love with, or out of some other thing to which I think Baldwin was quite addicted to, which is tension. And so the familial tension that he had, it surprises me that didn't birth early poems that were, because he was writing poems at an early age, and he had a really good poetry teacher, County Cullen, and I don't know why it didn't get over.
He didn't have a gift for it.
Right, well, yeah.
But I mean,
Believe me, when you're told you don't have
Yeah,
it,
but
you
there,
kind
but
of
there,
believe
I'm
that it
talking
does
about-
exist.
About the lyrical quality. I mean, we all know that Baldwin has. I mean, to say that he had a gift with language is just. I mean, that's a flat sentence because I mean it's beyond that. I mean, Baldwin has the ability to bring you to tears and make you sort of cock your head and say, "Huh." Like, I've been seeing that, but I didn't see it. I haven't, I don't know why I haven't seen that. And I almost wish that you could shake your own self up. And he does that so beautifully. It's a painful beauty that is existing in his writing. Again, that sounds like a flat phrase too. It's an oxymoron, but it's horrible to even try to even describe what his work is or what it does. So my question was only not to say, well, what about that James Baldwin? Why can't he work in every genre? He sucks. No, but rather like when you're that lyrical, like,
yeah.
and working in that, maybe the form was just, it just didn't work for him, and that's absolutely fine.
But no matter what he was writing about, no matter how dark, the prose always had a certain exuberance as prose. And in the late work, that exuberance has been exhausted. And I won't say there's something cynical going on, that's not it. It's a kind of, have to kind of do it. This is what I said I would do. This is the contract with myself. I am a writer. I am an artist. And so, you're really watching a great drama going on when you read these things. And it's like someone, you don't want to be reminded of your greatest hit from years ago all the time. But at the same time, if you've written Notes of a Native Son, you don't have to have written anything else. If you've written Invisible Man, you don't have to have written anything else. Not everything by a great writer need be great. And you learn as much from flawed works. In fact, you learn more from flawed works than you do from a masterpiece. A masterpiece changes everything after and can't be imitated. But a flawed work, you really kind of can see and, absorb the lessons in that way. I don't know. He is the most literary black writer there's ever been, even more so than Ellison going on and on about Stephen Crane. I think that is the appeal. And he didn't have to be a poet because, well, I don't want to say something romantic, so I'll stop.
So a few years back, I went to a program with the writer Carol Phillips, and he stated that one of the necessities for his writing process was that he had to be in places so foreign to him. And by foreign, and I won't belabor the point, he meant places that had nothing to do with the African diaspora, nothing to do with slavery, nothing to do with black people. And so he named a few places that he would go in order to write, basically places where no one knew who he was. And Baldwin has written about that, but also he did a lot of his work not here. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that sort of notion of displacement and in part the tension. Like Baldwin loved and despised tension at the same time. Like, let's talk a little bit about the notion of displacement and how perhaps that informed his work.
Well, I think I didn't have the same motivation as Baldwin. I didn't feel like I convinced myself that I needed to get out of the country at 18 when I had no responsibilities whatsoever. I wasn't from the kind of family environment that Baldwin was. I didn't feel oppressed by, anyone. But I just felt that he had created this template that I in some way had to fill. But so I don't feel displaced. And I think one of the interesting things about Baldwin was that after, I think, the first French experience was difficult for him. Yeah. And I think after that, when he traveled, he didn't travel as a tourist. He moved to a place and he became a part of the place, and the place became a part of him. He isn't one of these writers that, they go, he didn't leave the country to go on vacation, right. What it is. When he lived in France, he went on holidays to other parts of France. When he lived in Turkey, in the city, he would go to rural areas in Turkey. When he left the United States, it wasn't to go on a holiday, it was to go and be in another place and to, contribute in some way. And so I think he felt that he needed to escape some of the pressure of his family situation in particular, but also this sort of need to be loved, this need to have some sort of intimacy that was special and germane only to him, because he certainly had wonderful friends and he had good relationships with his siblings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But so I think he got away for those reasons. But when he was away, then he felt he had to come back to sort of charge up his batteries, as it were, and then go back again and write. And I certainly feel that living abroad, and particularly living in a place like England, where there's never been a time in the last 5 or 6 years where I can go into a room and there'll only be black people. Like, for example, if I go home and in my family, it'll just be a room full of black people. And I think that's necessary. It may not be necessary for me to write poems, but it's necessary for me to carry on. And I don't really have any other way to articulate that except that it does feel like I'm getting some sort of energy. That Greek myth of Antaeus who, when he's lifted from the ground, he has no strength, but as long as one of his feet is touching the ground, he draws his power from that. And I feel very much like I draw my energy and my ability to keep going from being able to come home and have my, be surrounded by friends and family, and then I can go back and spend 8 months or a year with the other.
I've always been interested how little the Harlem Renaissance writers mean to Baldwin, even though he had Count Cullen as a teacher. He wasn't a particular fan of Langston Hughes. It was Richard Wright who projected the future for Baldwin, go to France. Just as it was Baldwin who projected the future for me, go to Europe. He's part of that post-war generation that was coming back after, sort of fascism closed down the party and sent all the revelers home. And that generation came back with Henry James and their luggage, who had been recently rehabilitated. For a long time, Henry James was regarded as a traitor, not read in American classrooms. He'd been written out of the curriculum. But because of Peter Matthewson, Henry James was a very big deal for young writers in France when Baldwin was there. And Giovanni's room follows the ambassadors very closely. But in his sort of early essays and Notes of a Native Son and Nobody Knows My Name, already the big contradiction in his career that he had the wisdom never to solve was, he says there's no such thing as a experience in common. All experience is sort of private. And at the same time, he certainly wrote as though the black experience was something held in common. But more than that, I think that Henry Louis Gates talks somewhere about the slave autobiography is already promising the reader something. It's already very reassuring just by its existence. You know that the slave got away, is in the North, writing in freedom and looking back. And Europe was in a way like that for Baldwin. You know, he got away, could sit, look back, and sort of write about it all. And I think it was very important. Having lived somewhere else changes Americans. You sort of outgrow that parochialism of coming from a huge country, and you never sort of see it the same way or the world the same way. So when he finally saw those photos of what was going in the South and said, oh, I'm coming back, etc., he's already looking at the South not as just a black from the North or from the urban areas, but as someone who's seen the larger world, you know, and knows that there's sort of more things going on. And it's something he could never give up. He was a deeply cosmopolitan guy. He never came back. Not really. He came through all the time, but he never came back. And I think that for black writers of his generation and mine, there was still this feeling of, we got away. What's going on here doesn't have to kill me. You know, I can sort of turn it off or disconnect, or, you know, you're outside that jurisdiction, or white power can't sort of get you. All these things. Not true, but never mind. It's changed now for, I think, people your age, because as D.H. Lawrence said, there is no way, and you can be plugged in as much as you want, or you can still really tune out America. But he clearly needed to sort of be in touch. It really haunted him, but he couldn't stand to be here. And I sort of know that feeling very much. Somehow when you're here in America, the voice of the news alone is very wounding, whereas when you're away in another country, news from America doesn't hurt you as much because you don't hear it with that kind of smug or stupid voice. Does that, you know what I'm trying to say?
In a way, it's like what Claude McKay called the cultured hell that tests his youth in his 1921 poem, America, that no matter what, no matter where he was, far away, here in the village, he couldn't get away, but there was that ability to have the distance helped immeasurably with the work. I'm going to invite people to come up to the microphones. We're going to pass them around. Folks that might have questions, perhaps, or comments and things like that.
I didn't read this to you, so we all lucked out.
Good evening. Oh, snap. Okay. Good evening, everyone. How you doing? I was really interested in the second question you asked about Baldwin's relevance in the classroom. And I think to the point you made about, like, Baldwin living his literature in a sense, I think that, you know, I'm 24, and I didn't learn about Baldwin till I was 18. And the social context for which I learned him made him relevant in a way that the classroom hadn't. Because, you know, I can tell you throughout my undergrad career, I probably read over like 200 books. I only cared about five because they had any, like, a reference, like, you know, a reference, you know, relevance to my life. And I think that one of the limitations of literature is that it's not emphasized as a social, you know, it doesn't have a social, it's not emphasized in a social way, it's emphasized as a removed, like, this is a good conversation for a dinner party when you're eating, like, you know, salmon cakes, but, you know, when you're on the train in passing, how do you have those same conversations? And I live in Bed-Stuy, and I grew up there, and so, like, you know, I can have this conversation here, but it's harder to have that conversation in the barbershop. And so how do you make those conversations relevant is you have to find, well, what sends the conversations in a barbershop? What kind of conversations happen in the barbershop, and how do you work those, like, how do you work a Baldwin into that conversation in a way that now contextualizes Baldwin in a way they go, oh, okay, there's space here. And so I think that one of the limitations I've seen, even when he was taught in undergrad, was that he was on, like, in writing and literature in general, was only emphasized in the academic literary thought processes, but you know, that's sort of like your 9 to 5 living. But you know, everything else is like, well, that conversation is not, you know, welcomed. And so I think that one of the things of reason why Baldwin was big even in his time was because you seen him on TVs. There were people who could not, because like let's not be, you know, about black, like at least about a lot of poor black people, they can't read, period. So it's like to get a book is like, I can't even read this. But what invested, like what gave so many people morale to even want to read him was hearing him on the screen. And this poor kid from Harlem who like looked like them, who understood their experiences, articulating their experiences in a way that they've always thought about but never had the language to say. And I think that what has to happen, I don't know if y'all agree with me, is that literature and like Baldwin's and whoever have to be contextualized in a way that for the people who live on the day-to-day, who don't have the luxury of sitting in a classroom and having something on their syllabus, it's like, how do you, you know, pull my coat to this in passing? And I don't know if like y'all see that, or if that's something y'all acknowledge with, you know, just the way the literary world works, is like, how do I give you this in passing? Because that's a lot of like the black aesthetic is like, you know, hey daddy, let me pull your coat to something. I'm putting you on because I know you got somewhere to go. It's not like I have you here. And most people are not going to be like in a classroom sitting down. So it's like, how do you suggest from what y'all seen in y'all generations to pass it down to the younger generations?
I like to tell my students all the time that the classroom is a privileged space, because a lot of students love to tell me that, you know, I don't have anything, you don't understand my life. Like, and what's fun about that sort of statement is that they're assuming that my life is great because I'm, you know, I made up a syllabus or something like that. Okay. The classroom is privileged. Being able to, as I said, I think even just last week, listen to me drone on about Nella Larson's passing for an hour and 50 minutes and try to help them understand that this wasn't just a piece of literature, that this was something necessary in her life as an author, that there were systems in place that eventually brought her down as a writer, that a piece of literature for many people, but specific to the African American experience, is a tool of social justice, and what that means is something that I don't take lightly. So, with that said, I think that we have to meet people where they are, and they're not all in the classroom. I do feel strongly about that. So, where are they? All over. So, is it the barbershop conversation? Yes. Is it have you read so and so, and taking the time to sit and, what we would say in academia, unpack the issues in there, like demystify, another wonderful academic word, like demystify this content. Like why would I want to read this thing? It's like, it's old, it's dead, it's like, you know, but making it fresh. Sometimes what I find is people just want to hear about it. It's not that they don't want to do it. And literacy definitely is a factor. It's not that they don't, it's that they don't know why or how they should. And so each of us has a responsibility, in my opinion, again, to meet people where they are.
I don't really know how to answer that question, but how do you bring music into someone's life? How do you bring the latest movie you saw into someone's life? I mean, it's just about how you, the way in which Baldwin wrote, the way in which artists practice. We are, when you're producing something, whether you consider yourself an artist or not, but when you're producing something, you are just the filter for all of the stuff that exists around you, and then the product is the thing that's come through your filter. So you do it naturally. You came to this tonight, so you'll go off and you'll talk about this to some people. And maybe one person will remember you said something about James Baldwin, and if someone has a question about James Baldwin, they'll say, oh yeah, my friend was telling me he went to a thing the other night where, I mean, you shouldn't try to beat yourself up in being an evangelist for Baldwin. He was pretty much the best evangelist for himself that there was, and many other artists, I would say the same thing. It's just about being that. Being a beacon in your community, in your circle. Baldwin is very much alive in my circle of friends, and so I imagine that, the children that get produced from that, someone said that Baldwin was on, I'm not sure if it's you, said Baldwin was on the shelf in the house. I didn't have Baldwin on the shelf in my house, but now I have him on the shelf in my house, and so when people come, they see the books and they take them off and they peruse them. I guess don't weight it so much. That's the only thing I can say.
I mean, the best fiction isn't just an aesthetic experience. It's also reading history. I mean, The Great Gatsby is a perfect novel, but it's also something remarkable in what it tells us about the Jazz Age as history, because it's true. It's the truth. Baldwin works the same way. His Harlem is gone now, but everything he wrote about Harlem is alive there and has the revelations of good history. These days, reading is a minority activity. You're up against enormous forces that can't be undone by marketing, blah, 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 anything. Not only that, there are so many books published every year, 50,000 titles. That's a lot of trees that didn't have to die. Maybe that's great that a lot of it's electronic publishing. And the average shelf life of a book is from 4 to 6 weeks. So someone can work his or her heart out for 3 years, publish this book, and then it's gone. I find, just to make a generality about most of you here, that the young know a lot about what's happening now. In fact, they know everything about what's happening now and not a thing about what happened last week.
Right.
And so I used to say that the canon, when I don't believe in the canon, not at all. Time makes the canon, but never mind. I used to say that writers made the canon, that a writer cared about this writer and passed it on and passed it on. But now seeing what the classroom has done for America, I mean, Obama was elected not just because of the Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana in 1972, but because there were Black Studies classes at liberal arts colleges for years. So all these people were ready for him. They sort of had learned. And so I think Baldwin in the classroom is very important, and that would be the thing that most amazed him. Would be the thing that most amazed him were he alive today. People like Gore Vidal used to be driven insane that the Academy didn't take him seriously, that no one took him seriously. If you were popular, there was a kind of prejudice against you, and some of that hit Baldwin. But some of what you're also talking about has to do with what happened with the increase in the black middle class and the distance between the black middle class and most other blacks. And then the professionalization of universities and also the professionalization of the arts. You tell your parents now you're going to be a writer, they don't freak out anymore. And they used to, but they sort of don't anymore. And so it's too bad that writing is thought of as a profession because there are many different kinds of writing, but the writing we're talking about is still an art form. And you can't expect anything outside of doing it. You're setting yourself up for disappointment if you do. Right. And so then the last thing is that as important as I think black writing, women writing, minority writing, gay writing, all these things enter into the mainstream, fully aware that once you're in the mainstream, something is lost. I think it's wrong to read to identify. Read to sort of take a journey, to expand your head. I always remember Baldwin saying that as a child he read as though books were kind of weird food. And obviously it saved his sanity to read. But, you know, the thing that probably did Baldwin in most at the end was that he couldn't be alone. And reading and writing are profoundly solitary activities, even though they connect you with the world and with history and everyone gone before, and you write for the future. It's still a very solitary activity. So if you're wondering how you can help Baldwin or spread Baldwin, you're already doing it.
I loved your first question, all your questions, but how did I first meet Baldwin or encounter Baldwin was not through the classroom, but contemporary. That is, I read a review of Notes of a Native Son in the New York Times. And at that time, I was in college, and I was doing good work and tutoring up in Harlem. I did not have a clue about what that meant, what I was getting myself into. And I started reading Notes of a Native Son to help me. And Baldwin blew my mind. He just, you know, like I was being the good person there in it, and it was like, be honest. He made me be honest. And then I started reading all his other books, and that's what, I mean, not only his powerful intellect, but if you really read him, you had to be honest or put down the book. Mm-hmm. And I still have him on the shelf, and when I want to be honest, I go and read him.
Well said.
I'm sorry, we can't shoot. This is Dr. Rashida Ismaili, a phenomenal writer.
Thank you. I don't know where to begin. I want to say two things directly to you. Yeah, the first is
She's about to school you. Listen.
I remember Chinua Achebe came to do a residence at CUNY, and it was the English department was not as kind or as reciprocal and respectful. I'm using that word, as I thought they should. Anyway, he was finishing, and he was going home, and the students had a party for him, a bon voyage. He was going back home. And later, after the party, a group of us, Wilfred Carty and all of us, went to one of the clubs, one of those clubs on St. Nicholas between 124 and 125. And it was very crowded, and we had to wait. So I said to the waiter, please make sure that you give us a good table because we have one of Nigeria's most distinguished writers. That's all I said. So at the end of the set, he got us a table, and we were sitting having fun, and all of a sudden he said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to know the Sportsman's Bar. Said, the Sportsman's Bar would like to acknowledge the presence of a Pulitzer Prize. Either it was the Pulitzer Prize or the Nobel. But he knew it was a major prize. He said the playwright, and he was talking about Wole. But he knew that Wole was a Nigerian and an African writer. I say that to illustrate that you cannot judge the setting with the consciousness of people. He knew that. Nobody told him that. I said a major Nigerian writer. He said, this is the man that won the prize. He knew that. And that was in a bar. And okay. The other thing is, if you read some of the writings of Baldwin, you'll see how relevant he is now. For example, he has this wonderful line, I quote it a lot. He talks about, I think it's in Ifdil Street, Kentucky, and he's talking, the brother is describing the other brother, and he says, his Senegalese bush forest. No, that's just such a poetic expression of somebody's hair. Now, sometimes it's a little difficult to imagine that now because we've done so much to our hair in the last 30, 40 years. And that's the politics of beauty, and we've got serious issues. I'm just saying that's relevant to now because young people are still, young African descended children of all ages still have hair issues, and they may not see the beauty in that. But that's Baldwin, and it's just a very simple statement. And it's of love. When he writes about going to the church and having Pentecostal experiences, televangelicism is so aggressive, especially in African communities around the world. If you go to the University of Ghana right now, you will find about 500 statements. Jesus saves, come to Jesus tonight. Jesus will save you. Don't worry about this, come here. Not the latest book, but Jesus, huh? So I'm saying, when you think about Baldwin, and he talks about what that experience meant for him personally. And then I think just letting young people read the letter that he wrote to his 17-year-old nephew, who is now a father, Tijan. Those people who were saying Black Lives Matter, they could read that book. They could read that essay. They don't have to have PhD to read that. Our people do read. The thing is that the questions that they were saying, do you engage them in a conversation? Some of the most profound things come out of the barbershop and the bars. Jesse B. Simple, all of those things. So I think Baldwin is extremely relevant. I think writing is extremely important, and it's a very noble idea. And finally, Tony K. Bambara said that the role of an artist is to make revolution irresistible. I absolutely believe that. Paul Robeson said when he decided to become an artist, he decided to make his art his weapon. He had no other choice. And so that's every day in our lives. If you see somebody doing something, you find a way to say, hey, you know what? I do that all the time. Or you say something sweet to them. But Baldwin is alive. He is relevant. He has no time frame. And you can read any of his books. You can even read his one volume of poetry. He wrote a volume of poetry. Yes, I mean, he has covered it. And he does nonfiction, he does fiction, he does theater, and his commentary with Margaret Mead. I mean, it's wonderful. So, I mean, I think we should celebrate the fact that people are keeping him alive, like Richie and Darryl and Dante, keeping him alive. But you must keep him alive in a more active and a more immediate way, not in a distant way, because some of the cultures that are happening, some of the ways in which the hip hop generation, I don't know what that means, but this kind of thing that you've evolved, you sort of drop down from heaven and you're 16 or 18, whenever you discover that you are a person. No, you didn't birth at 18. It took 9 months and somebody did it. And that's a connection. That's a human connection. I'm just saying that Baldwin recognized that. He talks about when his mother would have a child, how he would stir a pot and have baby under his arm.
Yeah.
Or read a book.
And so I think that there's no aspect of Baldwin's life that cannot be shared with anybody of any age. His works have been translated, and I think there's no excuse, and I think we should embrace and be proud. Those of us who were fortunate to know him, or those of us who are African descent, we can say, that he belongs to us. But then other people can say he belongs to them too. Turkish people say he belongs to them too. But we're generous, we share. But I mean, really do share, and don't think of him as passé or a little bit distant. He really is relevant. And if you want to give a person a good present, go online. I hate Amazon, but you can get the book of poems. That's probably the only place you can get it. And he wrote a children's story.
Little Man,
That's
Little Man.
probably the only place that you can get it. If you just Google his name, you'll see the children's story and get it for him, because he had a very wonderful artist. It's almost like a collector's item. A very important artist illustrated his book. And those are things, when you give it to the child, you tell them what they're reading. Not only Baldwin. This was a major, major avant-garde artist, and he illustrated this book. And I think from cradle to grave, you find that Baldwin is a marvelous, marvelous spirit to embrace. And I give him to you.
I actually think that's a nice place for us to end. So I'd like to thank you for coming this evening, for participating by being here. I hear there's snow coming, so I appreciate you being here.
Tonight?
I'd like to invite you to stay for.
Rick has one little announcement.
Hi, Tracy, and Rich Blinn from
Okay.
Columbia. How are you?
Sorry.
An announcement. Hi, guys. I want to announce the Year of James Baldwin, Spring 2015 conversation series at Columbia University that runs April 7th, a conversation between Cass Phillips, and Russell Banks, the novelist, on Giovanni's Room. On April 23rd, we have Casey Lehman, the novelist and essayist, and Philip Lope talking about Notes of Native Son. On April 30th, the actor Joe Morton will be here at Columbia with Margot Jefferson, the Pulitzer Prize winner, talking about the Devil Finds Work. And at that point, I want to talk about the later work, if I can, for 1 second. That it's really hard for me to understand, well, a little tiny comment, right? That it's I think, a little bit crude to suggest that the later works are painted with such a broad brush. There's something else going on in Devil and Just Above My Head. It even evidence, right? So I want to, like, if we can pump the brakes just a bit with the wholesale characterizations. Because, Devil Finds Work is an incredible piece of work with all of its flaws, right? And we can talk about the mistakes that Darryl mentioned. But it seems a little bit, like folly to just throw them all out, after 1962. But please join us at Columbia. Thank you so much.
Rich, he will misbehave, right?